man. He boarded the plane like a shadow, silent, wounded, and utterly alone. No one helped. No one looked. No one asked what had happened, except for one person who truly saw him. Clara Reynolds, a soft-spoken nurse just off a grueling night shift, had no idea who the man was. She didn't know he was a general. She didn't know the entire nation would soon speak her name. She only saw a human being quietly carrying pain. And she chose kindness in the very moment an entire cabin decided to turn away. That small act, seemingly insignificant, unlocked a story no one could have predicted. A journey that took Clara from the very last row of a plane to the nation's highest stage of honor. The story you're about to hear won't just move you. It may make you believe again in something that's quietly faded. That kindness, when given freely, without condition, has the power to change a life, sometimes even destiny. Before we dive into the story, let us know where you are watching from. Clara saw him before he saw her. He was limping, gently, deliberately down the narrow aisle of the plane, his figure outlined in the cabin's soft blue light, like a shadow being pulled forward by something heavier than just a carry-on. There was no drama in his steps, no silent plea for help, but something about him made Clara sit up a little straighter, instinct flaring before logic even had a chance to engage. His right arm was wrapped thick in gauze, hanging stiff at his side, like even gravity had become too much for it to bear. His shoulders slouched not from old age, but from the quiet fatigue of someone who had carried too much pain for far too long. His face, lean pale, bore the unmistakable traces of recent suffering, that hollow look hospitals tend to leave behind like smudges on glass. As he passed her row, Clara caught a glimpse of his boarding pass, 29 farads, way in the back, right next to the restroom, under the constant hum of circulated air, where comfort was rationed and dignity thinned with every rattle of the drink cart. She watched him keep moving, politely declining the flight attendant's offer to help with his bag. Not rudely, not with anger, just practiced. The kind of practice that only comes from years of believing kindness is something meant for someone else. Clara had seen it before, in ERs, in rehab centers, in shelters. She had watched people become invisible in public spaces, on buses, in grocery stores, in checkout lines, not because they were feared, but because they made others uncomfortable. That strange reflex to look away from another person's pain, because acknowledging it means confronting your vulnerability. But Clara didn't look away. She looked closer, and in that moment, amid the hum of the plane and the shuffle of boarding passengers, Clara knew precisely what she had to do. Clara wasn't looking for anyone that morning. She was tired, worn thin from her last night shift, and more than anything, she wanted to disappear into her seat in row 4C and let the hum of the engines lull her into something close to rest. But the change in the cabin came before the man himself, before he even entered her line of sight. It was a collective quiet, a subtle recoil in the atmosphere. Passengers lowered their eyes, straightened in their seats, and turned ever so slightly away as if pretending not to see made them less responsible. He appeared in the aisle like an echo no one wanted to answer. Tall, limping slightly, moving with that kind of focus born not from pride but from necessity. His skin was the color of old mahogany, deep and rich, but across his neck and lower jaw, scars shimmered like fractured glass-burned skin, stretched tight, imperfectly healed. His right arm was wrapped in medical gauze, his posture stiff from the weight of pain that lingered long after a wound closed. But none of that is what Clara noticed first. What she saw was the space around him. People leaned away, not obviously, but enough. A man coughed into his hand and looked out the window. A woman with designer luggage reached for her drink without making eye contact. Even the flight attendant, previously warm and talkative, kept her tone clipped as she glanced at his boarding pass. No one said anything cruel. No one said anything at all. That was the cruelty. Clara knew that silence. She'd seen it in trauma wards, in waiting rooms, in the eyes of veterans and the hands of homeless patients who refused to accept pity but desperately needed care. She had learned, over years of tending broken bodies and fragile dignity, that sometimes it wasn't the pain that hurt most, it was being unseen, unacknowledged, unwelcomed. The man walked past her row, head high, eyes fixed forward, His ticket, barely visible in his hand, read 29 farads. Clara knew what that meant. The back row, the seat near the lavatory, the one that doesn't recline and hums with engine noise. The seat that says, "You're here, but only just." She didn't think. Her body moved before her logic caught up. By the time she reached him, he had already tried to shove his bag into the overhead compartment using one hand. No one offered help. His breath was shallow, jaw clenched, not from anger, but from effort. Clara placed a hand gently on the armrest beside him. "Excuse me," she said softly. He turned, startled, not aggressive, just guarded, the way people are when the world has trained them to expect the worst. "I'm in 4C, she said. "Business class. It's quiet, with lots of legroom. You look like you could use it more than I can." He blinked once, uncertain. "I'm fine," he said automatically. "I know you are," Clara replied. "But I also know what that walk down the aisle looked like. I'm a nurse. I've seen pain when it tries to hide. Let me do this for you, not because you need help, but because you deserve comfort." He looked at her for a long moment, searching her face for judgment, for pity, for strings attached. There were none, just tired kindness, and something rarer dignity offered freely. "I don't want to take your seat," he said. "You're not," Clara replied. "You're accepting a better one." She handed him her boarding pass before he could argue again. He held it like it might vanish. His eyes softened. "Thank you," he said. It was the kind of thank you that carried years behind it. She only nodded. As he made his way to the front of the cabin, the silence returned, but this time, Clara was in the middle of it. Passengers noticed her taking 29 farads. No one said anything. But for once, she didn't care. The seat was stiff, the air was stale, and the engine roar was relentless, but her chest felt lighter than it had in weeks. She didn't know his name, didn't ask. She had no idea who he was, or where he was going, or what had happened to give him the quiet resolve to steady his voice. All she knew was that when everyone else saw something uncomfortable and turned away, she looked, stepped forward, and saw a man who deserved more than silence. And that, to her, was reason enough. The soft drone of the aircraft filled the cabin like a lullaby, coaxing most passengers into silence. Overhead lights glowed faintly. Dinner trays had been cleared, and window shades lowered. Somewhere near the front, someone snored lightly. But back in 29 farads, Clara sat wide awake, something in her chest unsettled. It wasn't regret. She hadn't once doubted her decision to give up her business class seat. But something about the man, his stillness, the way he carried pain without complaint, lingered with her. Nurses develop a sense, a quiet sensitivity to the invisible weight people carry. It had saved lives before. Clara had long learned not to ignore it. She rose and moved up the aisle, navigating between legs, arms, and softly closed eyes. She wasn't sure what she'd say. She just knew she needed to see him again, to make sure he was, if not comfortable, at least safe. Row 4C. He was sitting upright, though slightly turned toward the window, like someone trying not to intrude on space that had finally softened beneath him. Clara approached quietly, crouching a little to meet his line of sight. "Hi," she said softly, not wanting to startle him. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." His eyes opened slowly. There was no fear in them, just fatigue. Deep, layered, familiar. "I'm all right," he said almost by reflex. "I'm Clara," she offered. "I'm a nurse." I couldn't help noticing. Earlier, when you lifted your bag, your hand was trembling. You're guarding your arm. He nodded slightly. "It's an old burn," he said. "I'm okay. Just stiff." She tilted her head gently. "Would you mind if I take a quick look? I brought a few supplies with me. It's a habit I've never managed to break." He studied her, not with suspicion, but with the long caution of someone unaccustomed to being approached without judgment or agenda. After a moment, he nodded. "Okay." Clara reached into her canvas tote, pulling out gloves, sterile gauze, a small packet of antiseptic, adhesive, and tape. As she carefully unwrapped the outer bandage, she could feel heat rising from his arm. The dressing beneath was damp. Not blood, but sweat. Warmth. Tension trapped under too many hours and too few chances to change it. This is holding too much moisture, she said gently. The skin underneath's not breathing. He didn't answer, but his posture relaxed, just slightly. She worked in silence, a practiced rhythm of touch and precision. She didn't ask what had caused the injury. The scars were enough of a story. Halfway through, a voice interrupted her. "Excuse me," a woman across the aisle said, her tone sharp but coated in politeness. "Is that allowed? What are you doing?" Clara turned, still crouched. The woman was middle-aged, dressed in smooth, ironed clothes, and clutching a phone tightly in her manicured hands. "I'm a nurse," Clara said calmly. "He needed the dressing changed." "Shake." The woman's eyes darted between Clara and the man. "It's just, well, I mean, do you even know him?" Clara smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Not yet." The woman let out a breath, half a laugh, half a warning. "I'm sorry, but he's just a stranger. You can't be sure." She trailed off, but the sentence hung unfinished in the air. Clara's voice didn't rise. "I know what pain looks like," she said, "and I know how often it's ignored, especially when it looks like his." The woman stiffened. "I didn't mean anything by it. Maybe not. But saying nothing isn't the same as doing nothing." Clara turned back to the man, whose gaze hadn't left her hands. He hadn't moved. But in his stillness, there was a quiet gratitude, raw, unspoken. She finished the new bandage and pressed down the final strip of tape. Her hands lingered just long enough to be sure. "There," she said. "Much better. That should keep you comfortable until you get it properly checked." He looked at her. "Thank you," he said, his voice low. "You don't owe me that," she replied. He hesitated. "Most people wouldn't have looked twice. Most people," Clara said, standing now. "Haven't watched someone suffer in silence." "I have. I don't like repeating it." She gathered her supplies and nodded to the attendant, who'd appeared at the end of the aisle. No one else said a word. The woman across the row turned toward the window and didn't look back. As Clara walked down the aisle toward the back of the plane, she felt neither heroic nor foolish. She felt present, settled, and like something in her had realigned. When she reached her seat, there was a napkin tucked into her tray table, folded neatly. On it, written in slightly slanted handwriting, were 6 words. "You saw me. Thank you, nurse." She didn't cry. She didn't need to. She folded the napkin, pressed it flat, and placed it into her journal without a word. Clara could tell something wasn't right. The man in 4C, the one she had helped earlier with the bandages, now sat slumped slightly, his complexion duller than before, the subtle signs of pain hidden behind years of restraint. She rose from her seat without a second thought, drawn not by obligation, but by instinct. The same instinct that had carried her through years of nursing in the ER, the same one that never failed to pulse when something human was at stake. As she approached, a voice behind her broke the quiet hum of the cabin. "Must be something special about him," came a sharp, sneering tone from row 5. A woman with a designer scarf and cold eyes leaned into the aisle. "He gets your seat, your hands, your sympathy. All that for a stranger? Just a black man who probably can't even afford a coach." The air chilled. Clara turned, slowly, calmly. "No one needs to earn compassion," she said softly. "He didn't ask for anything. That's what makes it worth giving." The woman rolled her eyes and turned away, muttering something about misplaced pity. Clara didn't look back. She knelt beside the man, gently touched his wrist, and felt the faltering pulse beneath her fingers. His breathing was shallow, his skin cool. She glanced up at the flight attendant. "He's in early shock. We need oxygen and fluids, now." The flight attendant nodded and sprang into motion. Passengers leaned into the aisle, curious, silent. Those who had ignored him before now watched with quiet concern. Clara stayed by his side, adjusting the oxygen mask, whispering reassurances. He stirred faintly, opening his eyes for a breath of a second. "You're all right," she murmured. "Just stay with me." He didn't speak, but the way his fingers twitched lightly against her hand said enough. By the time the plane landed, paramedics were waiting for them. As they lifted him onto the stretcher, Clara moved to step away, but he gripped her wrist gently. "Walk with me," he said. his voice hoarse but steady. She did. They moved together through the terminal, he on the stretcher, she walking alongside. As they turned a corner, a group of men in full military dress stood waiting. One saluted. Another held a phone to his ear, whispering quick, clipped words. Clara stopped. He asked for you, one of the uniformed men said. We were instructed to bring you if you'd be willing. Clara nodded, still uncertain of what was unfolding. They led her to a quiet hangar, where a sleek black SUV waited beside a helipad. The rotor blades of a nearby chopper spun slowly, humming in the dawn light. A man in a navy blue uniform with 4 stars across each shoulder stepped forward. Clara stared. You're... she began. The man on the stretcher sat up slightly, a soft wince escaping his lips. I didn't lie, he said gently, but I didn't explain either. The uniformed man approached and nodded toward Clara. This is General Monroe, he said, chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Clara blinked. The weight of what she was hearing settled slowly. Monroe looked at her with quiet gratitude. It was important to me that no one knew. I needed to see if I was still a man in the eyes of a stranger. Not a rank, not a title, just a man. Clara exhaled, the moment wrapping itself around her like silk. You were, you are. He extended something in his bandaged hand, a small engraved coin, for courage under silence and dignity when no one was watching. Clara took it, speechless. As the helicopter lifted into the sky moments later, she stood on the tarmac, wind in her hair, heart full. She had seen a man. And now, the world saw her too. 3 weeks had passed since the flight, a moment Clara often wondered if she had dreamed. But the coin he gave her, small and heavy in her drawer, reminded her it had all been real. Still, she never spoke of it. Not to her co-workers, not even to her closest friend at the hospital. It had been a quiet gesture done without an audience. That was how Clara preferred things. Until Thursday at 10 a.m., her name was paged overheard, not to the ER, but to the lobby. She arrived, expecting either a misplaced delivery or a lost visitor in need of help. What she saw made her breath catch in her throat. The entire hospital lobby had been cleared. Cameras, lights, uniformed personnel, and at the center, the man she thought she might never see again. General Monroe stood tall now, recovered, in his full uniform, medals catching the soft glow of the lobby chandeliers. His eyes met hers with warmth, and he stepped forward. Clara Reynolds, he said, not through a microphone, but with the calm authority of a man used to speaking where truth matters more than volume. 3 weeks ago, on a commercial flight, I sat bruised, bandaged, and silent. No one asked who I was. No one needed to. But you saw me. She stood, stunned, as he reached into his coat and drew out a box. Inside lay a Department of Defense Distinguished Service Medal. He held it out, but did not yet place it in her hands. I've seen battlefield heroics, Clara. I've commanded medics in an active fire. But what you did, giving up comfort, offering care, shielding someone from humiliation, not because you had to, but because it was right, that to me is valor. The applause began slowly, not staged, but real. Her colleagues, doctors, and nurses, who knew her only as the quiet, reliable ER nurse, clapped with their eyes wide. Some had tears. Then the hospital director stepped forward, holding a letter. Clara, he said gently, we received a call last week from the Department of Defense. Your story was shared in the President's cabinet. The First Lady herself requested your attendance at next month's National Nurses Forum. But that's not all. He passed her the letter, embossed with the seal of the Military Medical Corps. Clara unfolded it with trembling hands. It was an offer to become the chief nurse of advanced trauma response for the National Military Medical Hospital, complete relocation, housing, and a salary nearly double her current one. But what struck her most was the final line. We believe your leadership is needed not because of your rank, but because of your heart. Clara looked up, dazed. Me? I'm not. I never even applied. General Monroe smiled. You applied when you offered your seat and stayed by my side. You applied when you looked past rank, past scars, past silence, and chose to see the man. She didn't answer immediately. Her mind flickered back to late shifts, old scrubs, and the tiny apartment above the bakery she could barely afford. She remembered her father, who had worked 2 jobs to put her through nursing school, and her mother, who taught her that the most essential part of caregiving wasn't skill, but presence. She thought of all the moments that had passed unseen, the patients she sat beside after their families left, the extra hours she volunteered, the times she chose kindness even when it cost her sleep, energy, or comfort. All of it, she now realized, had mattered. Clara finally met Monroe's gaze. If I say yes, he met her eyes with quiet certainty. It won't change you. It will only give more people the chance to be changed by you. She nodded slowly. The medal was placed in her hands. This time, she didn't flinch from the attention. She stood tall, grounded not by pride, but by purpose. As reporters began to ask their questions and colleagues surrounded her, a quiet voice to her side drew her attention. An elderly patient she had treated months ago was being wheeled through the lobby. He looked up at her with frail eyes and whispered, "I knew you were someone special the day you held my hand through chemo. Never seen a nurse cry with a patient before." Clara knelt beside him and took his hand once more. "Thank you," she said softly. He shook his head. "Don't thank me. Just promise you won't ever change." She smiled. "Not a chance." That night, Clara sat by her window, the city lights blinking like tiny stars across the skyline. The medal lay on her table, next to the coin from the flight. Side by side, 2 symbols of the same truth, that kindness, when given freely and without condition, carries farther than we ever expect. Sometimes it lands in the hands of generals. Sometimes it circles back to transform the giver's life. And sometimes, just sometimes, it whispers to the world that goodness still matters. Even now. Especially now. Clara never planned on becoming a name people would remember. She didn't chase titles or stand in the spotlight. Her life had always been about small, steady acts, the quiet kind that never make headlines but matter deeply to the one person receiving them. She thought that flight would come and go like every other moment in her life. A simple gesture, a quiet decision. But kindness, she was learning, had a different kind of memory. It started with the offer an unexpected invitation from the Department of Defense. She had hesitated not because she was afraid, but because it felt too big, too grand for someone like her. She wasn't trained for politics or ceremony. She didn't know how to be important. But what she did know, deep in her bones, was how to show up when someone was in pain. And apparently, that was the very thing they needed most. Now, 6 months later, Clara stood in the hallway of the National Military Medical Center, her ID badge clipped neatly to her crisp uniform. The title beneath her name read, Chief Trauma Nurse. Every time she saw it, she still felt a flicker of disbelief, but the work grounded her. It was the same care, the same steady hands, just with a broader reach. She didn't talk about General Monroe much. She kept that story close, like a sacred thread stitched into her private world. What she did talk about, what she taught her team, was something simpler. You never know who you're standing next to, so treat everyone like they matter, because they do, and people listen. Young nurses began calling it the Clara Code, not an official term, but it lived on. It meant offering a blanket before being asked. It meant taking the extra minute to look someone in the eye, to call them by name. It meant seeing past the burn scars, the silence, the uniforms, and remembering that every patient was also someone's child, someone's partner, someone's story. One afternoon, Clara was preparing for rounds when a man in civilian clothes entered her office. He held his cap in his hand and looked unsure of himself. "Ma'am," he said, "you don't know me, but I was on that flight. I saw what you did, and I just wanted to say it changed how I see people." She was taken aback, but only smiled softly. "Thank you," she said, "but really, I only did what anyone would do." "No," he said quietly, "you did what most people wouldn't." Moments like that came more often now, not just gratitude, but reflection. Stories came to her from soldiers, nurses, even janitors, stories of people who had been invisible too long and were finally being seen. Clara listened to every word, not because she needed praise, but because she knew how rare it was to be heard. Her life outside the hospital was quiet. She still lived simply, still cooked the same meals her mother taught her. But there was a difference now. In her community, she had become something of a beacon, not for being extraordinary, but for proving that ordinary kindness could change the trajectory of everything. When the invitation came to speak at the National Nurses Forum in Washington, D.C., she nearly turned it down, but General Monroe himself called her. "Clara," he said, "this story isn't just about me. It's about all the people who go unnoticed every day. You've reminded us what human dignity looks like. That message needs your voice." So she went. She stood before a room of the country's top medical professionals and told them, without theatrics, what had happened on that flight. She spoke of the silence in the cabin, the way others turned away from her. She shared how compassion shouldn't be an act of bravery, but a habit of character. She ended simply, "I didn't give up my seat because he was a general. I didn't know that. I gave it up because he was in pain and no one else seemed to care. And in a world that too often rewards indifference, I chose to care anyway." The room stood still. Then, one by one, they rose to their feet, not just for her, but for the truth in her words. Later that evening, alone in her hotel room, Clara opened her small journal. She wrote, "Kindness is not a strategy. It's not a badge or a campaign. It's a choice, every day, every hallway, every seat on every flight. And someday, maybe if we keep choosing it, the world will stop being surprised when they see it." When she returned home, the town welcomed her with a warmth that made her chest tighten. Children waved signs that said, "Thank you, Nurse Clara." Her old hospital created a scholarship in her name. But the greatest gift came quietly when a new nurse knocked on her office door one evening. "I just wanted to say," the young woman said, "I became a nurse because of your story. And today, I stayed an hour late for a patient who was afraid to be alone. It didn't seem like much, but it felt right." Clara smiled. That's all it ever is. Just one person choosing to stay. She walked home that night under a soft spring rain. No cameras, no headlines, just the sound of her steps, steady and sure. And in her coat pocket, the coin still sat untouched, but not forgotten. It wasn't about luck. It was about legacy. Clara Reynolds didn't change the world in one grand moment. She did it the way sunlight does, quietly, persistently, with grace. And the world, finally, had learned to look her way. Clara had been working at the military hospital for nearly 4 months now, and though she had settled into the role of chief nurse with humility, it was clear to everyone around her that she was something more than her title. Her rounds were meticulous, her reports flawless, but it was her heart that drew people in. Soldiers in recovery looked forward to her visits more than they did to their medication. Young nurses mimicked the calm way she gave instructions. Even the cleaning staff, many of whom barely spoke English, found comfort in her smile that seemed to say, "I see you." Then one morning, the hospital received an emergency transport from a conflict zone overseas. Among the injured was a young private, barely 19, with third-degree burns across his chest and a spinal injury that left him paralyzed from the waist down. His name was Evan. Clara was called in to supervise his case. The moment she entered the room, Clara could feel it, the fear thick in the air. Evan's eyes were wide, darting to every shadow, and he refused to speak. His parents hadn't been located yet. He was alone, not just medically, but spiritually. Clara didn't speak right away. She simply sat beside his bed, placed a hand gently on his arm, careful not to cause pain, and waited. It took 3 days before Evan said his first words to her. "Why bother with someone broken?" Clara didn't flinch, because being broken is just one part of healing, not the end of it. From that moment, something changed. Evan let her help him eat, then let her clean his wounds. Days later, he asked if she could read to him. She chose Letters from Home, a book written by soldiers and their families. Slowly, his silence softened. He began telling her about his dog back home, the football scholarship he had turned down to enlist, and the fear that now maybe he had made the wrong choice. One night, during a late shift, Clara found Evan sobbing softly. He had just been told he might never walk again. "I don't want to be a burden," he whispered. Clara crouched down, her voice unwavering. You are not a burden. You are a life, and lives don't need to justify their worth. The next morning, Evan asked if Clara could be present when he met with the rehabilitation team. Not because she was his nurse, but because, as he put it, she's the only one who doesn't look at me like I've disappeared. Word spread, and for days afterward, Clara's colleagues began saying what they'd all thought, but never voiced. This woman wasn't just healing bodies, she was restoring souls. And in a quiet drawer in her office, beneath patient notes and charts, Clara tucked away Evan's first handwritten note to her. You made me feel human again. Clara's story isn't just one to admire. It invites reflection, because what she did on that flight, offering her seat, showing care when no one else would, wasn't a grand gesture. It was quiet, simple, and yet it carried weight. She didn't do it because anyone was watching. She didn't do it for praise. She didn't even know who the man truly was. She only saw someone alone in his pain, and she did what few others would. She chose to care. And maybe that's why her story matters. Because in today's world, rushed, distracted, and often indifferent, it's easy to miss people like Clara. The ones who still move gently, who still believe kindness is its reward, who still pause, look, and offer help without needing a reason. How did Clara make you feel? We'd genuinely love to know. Leave a comment below and share your thoughts, not just for us, but for the next person reading, someone who might need your words as much as they needed this story. Sometimes a single comment can connect strangers across continents. A memory, a thought, a simple, this touched me, it matters. And if this story moved you, subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the following videos.